This is Hadrian Radio, coming to you from Free Catalonia, a KA radio production.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Radio Hadrian Week 15. Week 15, which has been a very interesting week. It's the third of very interesting weeks of events here in Catalonia. And of course tomorrow, this is a recorded programme, this is Saturday, last day of September, and tomorrow the 1st of October is the long-awaited Referendum Day. At this point in time, at this hour, it looks as though there will be a referendum. The on-off referendum is going to go ahead. It may not go ahead, but at the moment it looks as though it will. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of all of this because something else occurred to me. This campaign for a referendum and the democratic right to vote has been very carefully engineered and carried out by an organisation called Omnium. Omnium Cultural, until recently it wasn't particularly known. I had heard of it, but 4 weeks ago I started realising that the word Omnium was appearing on adverts everywhere. And Omnium have been responsible for this whole campaign. I hate to think how much it has cost to persuade people that they should be shouting for democracy and the right to have a referendum, when that money could equally have been spent on a campaign to force Carles Puigdemont to declare independence, as he has a mandate to do so. And we've talked about this before. So this isn't going to be about the politics of what's going on here. The language used in this campaign is very, very powerful language. So powerful it has managed to persuade, I'm not quite sure how many million people, that they should cry for democracy and not for UDI. And language is a very, very interesting thing. What would you say if I tell you that Scots, that a lot of you speak, is classified as a vulnerable language with 150,000 people speaking it, at least, who say they speak it. Now, whether they just speak it at home or with friends and social settings, I don't know. But it's classified as a vulnerable language by UNESCO. And before I keep talking about this, I have to say, as soon as I say the word UNESCO, little alarm bells ring, because anything with the letters UN at the beginning are American-based organizations. So UNESCO, UNICEF, United Nations, all of these things. However, they have produced a very detailed list of endangered languages, a classification of endangered languages, which starts with vulnerable, which is what Scots is, along with Welsh, Basque, Maori, to extinct. Obviously, extinct means there's nobody left. And the other classifications are vulnerable. Most children speak the language, but it may be restricted in certain places. Now, that makes me think about Scottish schools, so I'll talk about that again in a moment. Definitely endangered. Children no longer learn the language as a mother tongue at home. That's Gaelic. Severely endangered. Language is spoken by grandparents and older generations, while the parent generation may understand it, they do not speak it to children or amongst themselves. Critically endangered. The youngest speakers are grandparents and older. They speak the language partially and infrequently, and they have no younger people to speak the language to. And extinct, there are no speakers left. So when I think about language and what's happening here in Catalonia, there is a whole lot of different things at play. And I want to draw some parallels between Scots and Gaelic and Catalan. Scots is classified as a vulnerable language. Now, there are schools in Scotland that I know of where Scots is it's not the official language of instruction, but it's definitely the accepted language, and where Scots is allowed to be spoken and the teachers will speak Scots. When I was at school, as I mentioned in a previous programme, and many of you listening, if anybody's listening, many of you will also remember the days when you got the strap if you spoke Scots at school. The same thing would have happened with Gaelic. But Scots is not the official language of Scotland, which is ridiculous. Gaelic is even in an even more critical condition. It's not classified as in critical danger, but it's definitely endangered. And when I'm talking about this, I want to pay tribute to a man called Finlay MacLeod. Finlay won't be listening to this program, but some of you may know Finlay. Finlay is a man who has for decades been fighting to ensure that Gaelic is the language for families and children. And as he rightfully knows, if you have children speaking a language, the language will continue. And he has done some amazing work with nursery schools and family Gaelic. I would love to interview Finlay one day if he would agree to do so, another day. So in Scotland we have 3 languages. We have Scots, which is vulnerable. We have Gaelic, which is endangered. And then we have English, the world's second most spoken language. The most spoken language is Chinese, but it's generally only Chinese people who speak it. Yes, I know some other people do speak Chinese, but it's not exported the way English is. And then I come to Catalan, a minority language, but it's spoken, I don't have the actual figure here. It's spoken by some millions of people, so it's not on the endangered list. And Catalan is the language of instruction in schools here. Catalan has its strengths in both education and theatre, which are both only in Catalan. It's the official language of the government, of the Generalitat, although that doesn't mean that everybody in there only speaks Catalan. There will be people who will also speak Spanish within the Generalitat. So Catalan has got some strengths, but it has been used in this recent campaign to work against independence. So what do I mean when I say Catalan? The official language of Catalonia has been used in this campaign against independence. Well, you would imagine, wouldn't you, that in a place like Catalonia, where they have their own language, which is spoken by millions of people, is the language in every single school and in the theatres, and supposed to be the official language of the Generalitat, the government, that things would be done in Catalan. So what do I mean when I say that Catalan has been used against independence through this campaign organised by Omnium Cultural? Well, you have journalists, and journalists here speak Catalan. Through this campaign, a journalist, if they're speaking with Spanish media, or if they're speaking with international media, and they, particularly with Spanish media though, and they use a Catalan word. Now they're supposed to speak in Spanish to the Spanish media outlets, but if your native tongue is Catalan and you greet somebody or you go to ask a question at a press conference, you're likely to automatically say bon dia, bona tarda, and this is looked down upon, and that journalist will later more than likely have to apologise for using Catalan. That's not unsimilar to what it used to be like with Scots, although Scots is a vulnerable language, but you were looked down upon if you spoke with a Scots accent instead of an educated, polished English Scots accent. Anyway, back to Catalonia. Here we've got print media, and there are several Spanish newspapers, online and hard copies, who produce editions in Catalan. We've got La Vanguardia and we've got El Periódico. Both of these are very big newspapers. Both of them produce a Catalan version, but it's edited and it doesn't give a true Catalan viewpoint. It gives a Spanish viewpoint written in Catalan. This is similar to what happens in Scotland. So some of you will know that in Scotland we don't have a large number of daily newspapers, but there's a large number available because we get the Scots versions of, for example, the London Times. And the London Times is like La Vanguardia in that it is imperialistic. And so an imperialistic version of an imperialistic newspaper, even if it's written in Catalan, is not going to give an independent Catalan viewpoint. Last week, or maybe last week or the week before, I read somebody's comment, a Scots person's comment on social media, and they were commenting on the fact that, or at least in Catalonia, they've got their own language. But that language, as I've just said, can be used against you. Not just for the print media, but journalists speaking at press conferences, asking questions. And the fact that Catalan is the official language here is not as clear as you would think. There are many, many people here who don't speak Catalan. I think I've talked about this before. And there are people who have come here from other Spanish-speaking countries as adults and either don't want to or don't have the time, don't have the money. Actually, no, the money doesn't count because the government does basic Catalan courses for nothing. But perhaps they don't want to, or they don't have the time to learn Catalan, and so they continue speaking Spanish. Their children go to school and they speak Catalan because they have to, but when they come home, the language at home is Spanish. And this is interesting because I'm doing Catalan courses at the moment, and in that class there are 2/3 South American students, and then there's a small group of us who come from a mixed bag of countries: Scotland, Italy, France, United States. All of those people from the South American countries also are native Spanish speakers, and they are learning Catalan. And this course, when you start at the basic level, is free. The government provides free Catalan courses all over Catalonia. When you go to higher levels, you have to pay, but you still don't have to pay as much as if you would go to private classes. And so there's a big push to preserve the language here. So when you think of Catalan as being the official language here, this is correct. So that person on Facebook who said, oh, but at least they have their official language, we don't have that in Scotland, was absolutely correct. But the officialdom of the language is at stake. Why do I say that? Because Catalonia is still part of Spain. Like it or not, and at the end of tomorrow, it will still be part of Spain, because we know that the referendum is not going to bring independence. That's another story, though. So it's still part of Spain, and you can't have two official languages in a country, especially if that country is an imperial country as Spain is, or the UK. So the official language here in Catalonia, you could say, is actually Spanish. I mean, it's not really, it's Catalan, but you could almost say, well, in actual fact, Spanish can override that. And so there's a continual battle, as far as I can see, between the rights of the people who are Spanish-speaking people from South American countries or from other parts of Spain to speak their mother tongue over the rights of Catalan people to speak their mother tongue. And so it's a little bit like a linguistic tug of war, I suppose. An interesting thing is that there are more universities teaching Catalan in Germany than there is in the rest of Spain. So outside of Catalonia, less universities teach Catalan than in Germany. Now, I suppose you could say that Spain, being so anti-Catalan independence and anti-Catalan, are not going to encourage universities to teach Catalan. Another interesting thing about this tug of war with Catalan and Spanish, or the Spanish government, is that a few places within, let's call it Spain for the moment, where Catalan is the official language. Not only in Catalonia, but we've got Valencia down in the south, and we've got the Balearic Islands, so Mallorca, Menorca, and Catalan is the official language in these places. But the Spanish government, Spanish politicians, make a concerted effort to overrule that and not call it Catalan. So they give it different names like Valencian. So by so doing, diminish the Catalan part of it. So keep the Catalan part out of it and don't use the word Catalan. And academics don't do that. So in the universities, it's still referred to as Catalan. But the Spanish government has a very anti-Catalan attitude. And this isn't new. This idea of the imperial dominant country overriding minority languages is not new. This happens all over the world. For example, we've got what's happening here with Catalan. Although Catalan is a minority language, not an endangered language, it has enough young people speaking it to ensure that it will survive. If you look at Scotland and you look at Scots and you look at Gaelic, even more so, they're overruled by English. And as Finlay MacLeod says, I'll refer to what Finlay says again, why is so much money spent on promoting English in Scotland? And the answer is quite simply that Scotland is still a part of the United Kingdom. It's not an independent country. And if you are part of a colony or an imperial united setup, you have to speak the mother tongue of that imperial country. So in Scotland, unfortunately, English remains as the official language, and that has severe repercussions for Gaelic and for Scots. In fact, although there are more people registered as speaking Scots, and these figures come from census data, although there are more people registered as speaking Scots, it's not official anywhere, apart from a couple of schools that choose to, I shouldn't say a couple because I'm not sure how many, but I know there are a few schools that choose to use Scots as their language, but that's not the official language of education in Scotland. And I think there's possibly a more concerted effort to keep Gaelic alive than there is to keep Scots alive. There are certain individuals in Scotland who do a wonderful job in keeping Scots alive, and there are some wonderful organisations like the Scots Language Centre and Rab Wilson, the wonderful poet who does a brilliant job in promoting Scots, but they're not official. And I don't think Scots, anybody correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think Scots receives any funding from the Scottish Government. Gaelic does receive funding, but it doesn't receive enough funding. The only way Scots and Gaelic and Catalan can become 100% official languages in our two respective homelands is by independence. As long as we remain part of a bigger imperial setup in the UK or Spain, our languages are always going to be vulnerable or endangered or minority languages. And in both cases, I suppose the cases are a bit slightly different. In Scotland, education is supposed to be a devolved matter. That means that the Scottish Government apparently has full power over education. And I did a programme before on devolved powers and reserved powers, and it's very difficult to ascertain where the division is between them because the two seem to cross over so much. And having taught in Scottish primary schools, I don't see anything particularly Scottish in the curriculum in Scotland. The curriculum for excellence has not attended to the fact that the children should be getting taught in their mother tongue, Scots or Gaelic. Everything is English. The curriculum is almost the same as the curriculum in Australia, where English is the official language. I can't talk about English primary schools because I've never taught in England, but the curriculum does not have anything in it that is particularly Scottish in content. Independence is a long, long way for both of us, for Scotland and for Catalonia. Another interesting point to compare between language in Scotland and language here in Catalonia is that here in Catalonia, although Catalan is the official language in education, the government and theatre, it's not the official language for so many other things. So for example, computer games. You buy them here, they're only going to be in Spanish. You won't get computer games in Catalan. There's a lot of dubbing takes place here and it's dubbed into Spanish, not into Catalan. In Scotland, we don't even have that. I'm not quite sure if computer games, for an example, are produced in Gaelic. I'm probably certain that they're not. And they're certainly not produced in Scots. They're all produced in English. So again, you have the imperial language dominating everything. I'm not quite sure of the extent of the powers that the Spanish government would have over the Catalan language and its promotion. I mean, you've got the Catalan government which clearly promotes Catalan, but I'm sort of wondering whether or not, like London, can Madrid overrule what happens here? That's something that I might have to look into a little bit more. In Scotland, we've got a situation where, even though we have this devolved government, which is supposed to be in charge of education and law and some other vague things, London can overrule. London can shut down the Scottish government anytime it wants. So the idea that Scots or Gaelic would ever become official languages until we get independence is always going to be up to London. And when I say London, I include the so-called independence leaders of, particularly of the SNP, who, as we know, are not delivering independence, not talking about it, because that's not their plan. And that's the same as here. Another brilliant example of vulnerable, endangered minority languages, actually no, it's not a minority, is in Australia with Indigenous languages, where once upon a time there were hundreds of pure Indigenous languages. And they were all different. They weren't different versions of the same thing. They were different languages, not dialects and not accents, but totally different languages. And through an intense campaign over 200 years, the Australian government, successive Australian government, has successfully managed to make some of those languages extinct. So not just endangered, but there are no speakers left. And one really clear example that comes to mind for me is that a few years ago I read of a situation where one Indigenous language, I can't remember which one it was down to one speaker. It was critically endangered, one speaker, and he was a very old man, and he was about to die. And he knew that with him, his language would also die. So he looked for somebody who could learn the language from him. And he painstakingly taught that language to a Japanese linguist, a young Japanese linguist. Spent a few years living with this man, 1 or 2 years, learning the language until he was fluent in it. But they also wrote it down. But the sad thing about that is, whilst the language is extinct, in reality, the only living person who speaks it now is a young Japanese linguist who is hardly going to, I don't know if he's married or not, but he's hardly going to teach his own children the language, unless he marries an Indigenous woman and they have children and they make sure that those children learn this language. We have some bizarre situations in Australia, and I'm sure that this happens in other places where native people have been denied the right to speak their language, and so the languages have died out. But in Australia, the children go to school, and if they already have their native tongue, their mother tongue, they often have 2 or 3 mother tongues. And by the time they start school, they're multilingual, and then they have to start learning English. And learning English is quite a problem, because when they learn English, they generally learn it in what's called an Aboriginal English. So, in English you have standard English, which is what we were supposed to speak at school. And then you have different versions of English. American English, Australian English. And in Australia, Aboriginal children speak Aboriginal English to begin with. And Aboriginal English has different rules to standard English. So, for example, a double negative. Now, sometimes you will hear people in English saying, I didn't do nothing. All right, now we know that's wrong. In English, in standard English, you can't say I didn't do nothing. That's called a double negative. And so these little children go to school and they use double negatives because that is normal in Aboriginal English. And then they get chastised by non-Aboriginal teachers for not speaking proper English. And so bit by bit, you chip away at that, and then they stop speaking Aboriginal English. Their capacity to speak their mother tongues in mixed mainstream schools in Australia is very, very limited, because unless they're lucky enough to have Aboriginal teachers, the instruction's always going to be in English. And so those children have a limited capacity to develop and maintain their mother tongues as well. I don't know how many Aboriginal languages are left, and I don't know the figures for how many people still speak them, but they are on the critically endangered list, if not extinct. So I'm sorry, I've had a bit of a rant today because this is a big weekend, as you would imagine, and I didn't want to talk about politics, but my mind keeps going back to the politics of this. I really wanted to talk about language and how imperial countries use that language to, it's linguistic genocide, isn't it? To wipe out a people. If you wipe out a language, you wipe out a culture. Culture and language are totally related. And if you want to continue dominating a country like Scotland or Catalonia or Aboriginal Australia is not a country, but it's a culture, you remove the language. So there's 3 examples. We've got Catalan, which is a minority language, and it is being used against the Catalan independence movement by Catalan organisations. And we have Scotland, where we have Scots and Gaelic that are not given the right respect from the Scottish government. And in both these countries, the languages are subject to Spain and the UK. Australia is a slightly different situation, but it's a very good example of how you can destroy a country. And sadly, unless Scotland and Catalonia declare independence, we're not going to be independent. It's not going to happen. The UK, NATO, the USA, Spain don't want it. And if they don't want it, they will make absolutely certain it doesn't happen. So unless we declare independence, we are doomed. And I foresee a future where Scotland, sadly, will become just another part of Britain. And historically, the place we know as Scotland will disappear. That's a very sad note to end this on. But this is a very sad subject: language, culture, and imperialism. I'd love to think tomorrow that Catalans vote yes, but I also know that if they do overwhelmingly vote yes, that the powers that be, the Catalan government and the Spanish government, will make sure there's some way to say, no, it's invalid. We'll have to have another referendum in 2 years' time. And then we've killed independence, we've killed Catalan culture, we've killed Scottish culture, we've killed independence for both our countries. End of story. Thanks very much for listening, and I hope that wasn't too much of a rant. I think it probably was. My mind's not really concentrated very well today. Have a lovely weekend, and wouldn't it be great if week 16 was coming to you from the world's newest republic? Bye for now.
This is Hadrian Radio, coming to you from Free Catalonia, a KA radio production.
Good afternoon, Scotland. This is David Raventos, and this is chapter 15 of Radio Hadrian. Thanks as always for listening and for trying to make this program, which tells the truth about Scottish and Catalan independence processes in a way nobody else will. So if you can keep sharing any way you think, like WhatsApp, Twitter, email, word of mouth, Facebook, anywhere, we need you to get independence, because only truth about the hard lives we've been suffering both in Scotland and Catalonia can bring about independence. This is a special day for us. I won't name it historical day because today, 1st of October, which is the day after we are recording this program, so we have to be a bit cautious because we don't know if there's going to be voting or what's going to happen. What we sadly know is that this referendum won't bring about independence in the next few days, because referendums, as we have said in programs like 3 or 4 in the case of Scotland, don't bring independence. Only UDI will bring independence. But it's a special day. We are wondering how would they find an excuse not to declare independence if they're gonna make parties fight. They're gonna lie to us saying we haven't won. If anyways, they'll say there's a low turnout and it's not recognizable internationally. We know that the world doesn't want independence, but the world needs to respect the image of democracy, so we're just wondering how they're gonna make it. I want to keep emphasizing the importance of this program, because you might think you have a lot of things, but this is a film, and like it happens in a lot of films, you don't know who the good guy is and who the bad guys are. So the whole film you are looking things differently, and then there's a twist in the tale, and the one you thought that was the good guy is the bad guy, and vice versa. So it's a case here. The same situation is in Scotland and in Catalonia. Everything we love has, through infiltration, been run by our enemies, mainly SNP or the National in Scotland, and every party, social media, social organization, and media in Catalonia. When you think you would like to have our media and our marches, I have bad news for Scottish people, because both our media and our marches are enemy run, are Spanish organized. Because marches, media, nothing brings independence except unilateral declaration of independence. Everything else is for show. So this program is the only voice to break unanimous lies, both about Scotland and Catalonia. It's like the kid that says that the emperor was naked, or it's like the girl in the film The Truman Show. Scotland and Catalonia are like Truman in the film. Everything they love and see, their wife, family, friends, work companions, people they buy from, people they say hi to in the streets, they're paid actors. And that's why you see somebody who's supposedly tearing up to pieces somebody from a different party in parliament, and then you see them chatting nicely and having coffee together. Because that's what happened with films. You might have somebody fighting somebody else, fighting and hitting and shooting, but then when the filming is over, they're together in the canteen, like chatting, because that's what it is. It's a Hollywood world production, this, which is called No Independence for Member Parts of NATO Member States. And that we already saw Quebec 1 and 2, we already saw Scotland, and now it's Catalonia, it's episode 4. So it is very important, because as we learned from Solomon Ash, if only somebody tells the truth, when there's a conspiracy of liars and silence, the number of people who believes the lie drops by a factor of 7. So now we have 99% of the indie field which has been lied to, thinking that referendums brings independence. But Radio Hadrian, we have the objective, and there's a political objective around here, and there's a communicational objective. Radio Hadrian is the last bastion of Scottish and Catalan independence, because most everything else is in the hands of our enemies. The objective, both in Scotland and Catalonia, of the powers that be are avoid independence, protect the image that there's democracy, maintain top molds like Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon, and everybody else you know and love in place, because it's very difficult to place everybody who runs Catalonia and Scotland. That's a lot of millions of pounds, euros, years of work, thousands of people collaborating with them to help them rise to where they are. So that's something that they don't want to have to keep doing. So they want to keep these people in place for as long as they're useful for them, until they decide that the character has to leave the soap and it's substituted by another character, but it's an actor as well. So we are never represented. And another objective, if they can, is to kill both independences in Scotland and Catalonia, if they can, for a century, because that's how states work. They have people there. It reminds me of Humphreys and the minister, yes, prime minister. I mean, prime ministers come and go, but functionaries of empires stay there forever, and they know what long-term plans are. And there's a fifth objective, which is to mock us. Empires like to mock us, and they choose dates for things, and they have us running after people that works for them, but we think that they work for us. And they like to mock us because they consider we are inferior. It's funny because we think that we are better than our enemies, but our enemies have had us subdued for 300 years. So if they were so lousy in doing what they do, where does that leave us Scots or Catalans that won independence? The name of the game is infiltration. And I'll put an example of what goes on here. Here, unionists haven't mobilized to go to vote today, which is tomorrow when we're recording this. And that can only mean that there's no real danger of independence next week. Next week, they're going to find an excuse not to declare independence, that we didn't win, that we won, but there's no enough quorum or guarantees, that anything they deem suitable. We're not going to be Nostradamus here. What we know is that this referendum don't bring independence, but we don't know who the director of the film or how the director of the film has decided that to happen. But the name of the game to keep Scotland and Catalonia in imperial hands is infiltration. There's no better strategy than have all the communication and political generals of your colony in your pocket, but not just like after they become. No, the people that rises to power positions both in Scotland and Catalonia are there because they've been put there by our imperial enemies. And there's no better strategy than that. We don't believe things coming from the BBC. But if pop star Nicola Sturgeon says that she has a plan for Scotland, or it's time to postpone referendum, people buys it. Because only your friend can stab you in the back, only your friend can betray you. And it's the same thing in Catalonia because it's the same script. We have people that make fat checks and salaries and get very famous from barking towards our imperial masters, but actually they work for them. And it's the same thing here. Everything has been infiltrated, so now our leaders are leading us to a referendum that was not in the roadmap or the mandate we gave them in 2015. It could have been declared the next day, but technically at least after 18 months, which is something they included in the roadmap. A roadmap that didn't include referendum, as some members of parliament that have been elected under that mandate or manifesto privately recognize its electoral fraud. So that's what we are seeing in Catalonia. We don't know if we'll be able to vote and they will take the vote. There's going to be violence. There's going to be whatever. But that's just the prestige before the big trick. The big trick is there's not going to be independence coming from this referendum. And that's why unionists have not bothered to vote. And that is because there's no risk for independence. If there's no risk for independence, our brain tells us they can only know because our leaders, President Carles Puigdemont and Deputy Prime Minister Oriol Junqueras, have given compromise to the unionist side that they don't declare independence next week. And if they say that, if they were, and that's important to understand, but we are targeting the most free-thinking, experienced, cultured, informed, patriot, intelligent people first. We cannot reach everybody in the first stage. We need 10,000 heroes in Scotland, 10,000 heroes in Catalonia to mobilize and to lead the millions of Scottish and Catalan people that have been hijacked by our enemies under false flag or submarine parties and media and social organizations sometimes. How could the unionists believe the words of Oriol Junqueras and Carles Puigdemont not to declare independence if they were the enemy of them? That they don't. So the only reason unionists are not marching and voting is because they know Oriol Junqueras and Carles Puigdemont work for them, so they'll never declare independence. Maybe they go as far as to declare it, but then they take it back, or it's not. We had something like this in 1936, so they will have to keep counter-programming us because they need absolute surprise to do the things they do to us. But as we said, especially in chapter 3, and as we spoke in Scotland, independence don't come through referendums. The links between Scotland and Catalonia are made visible in the person of Joan Vives and Solervicens, of who we spoke in chapter 5. This person has provenly made Deputy Prime Minister Oriol Junqueras to become president of his party. The problem is Joan Vives and Solervicens and his former girlfriend Elisenda Palusia and very present in Scotland, Anna Arqué. She's a contributor in Bella Caledonia last time I checked. She appeared in BBC, in Russian Times, and different media projecting the international image of Catalan process, while she happens to work for the enemy. She came from London, actually. She appeared from nowhere from London, where Joan Vives introduced her in the indie field. Well, Joan Vives and Anarchy, we mentioned a few weeks, came to threaten or intimidate us and push us towards, we should say. Joan Vives has made Oriol Junqueras where he is. Joan Vives, Spanish spy, has done telemarketing for CUP, which is a splinter party here that is supposed to be for independence, but it's Spanish run, as everything else. And through that, he made Carles Puigdemont president in a very rigmarole, shenanigan-y assembly where 1,500 people drew with 1,500 people 15 to make Carles Puigdemont president in a very weird way. So we have a Spanish spy that has made Puigdemont president, Oriol Junqueras president of his party, and put CUP where they are. And they all are linked to Spanish spies, so that's why they want to shut us down, because we are exposing here high-level infiltration that reaches number 1, 2, and everybody else in Spanish and Catalan government. So that's why they want to shut us up. These people also have interesting links because they paraded through Catalonia Stephen Noon, the mole who was running the Yes campaign for Yes, and he lied to us, and he's sponsored by Spanish spy Joan Vives, and his answers and his lies means that Stephen Noon is a mole highly placed in the Yes campaign. You cannot win a referendum when your head strategist works for London, can you? We also had Shona McAlpine here. She lied to us about exit polls, and it was an act organized by Anarchy and Joan Vives, as usual. And also Angus Brendan McNeil, Amer Anwar, Chris White, Gil Lithgow, and Humza Yousaf, among others, have come to conferences organized by either Palusier, Arqué, or Vives. All of them Spanish spies, all of them collaborating in getting me criminally locked, interned, tortured, and misdiagnosed, and pushed to suicide. All these people also collaborated in this one way or another. So the last link to Joan Vives, the Spanish spy that wanted and is really looking forward to shut us up, is Omnium Cultural. The big trick, the big Pavlovian trick they've played to us is we had a mandate and a free road to independence 2 years ago. We had somebody like Muriel Casals that we explained in chapter 1 is the Catalan Willie McRae. She was in an important place in Parliament 4 days. After 4 days, she says that the roadmap to independence, she said it on television, the road to independence stays as planned. That means no referendum, UDI. And the same day she says that in television, she is run over by a bike. And 2 weeks after that, she dies with a lot of circumstances we went over in the first chapter. And then a referendum appears. Well, you cannot expect to have the same level of proof that you would have in a so-called democracy, though people listening to Radio Hadrian should already know there's no democracy in the world. But you cannot expect that the crimes of Hitler, Stalin, Pinochet, Franco to be known in their own details until their criminal regimes are finished, and then people are free to speak up the truth, and police and judge can do normal job. So Muriel Casals had to be murdered so Spain can murder Catalan independence through a referendum, which is not going to be this one because this won't have effect. Probably the plan is to have a Scottish-style referendum in a couple of year times, and that will be the one they'll rig. But will already have been rigged by moving it from the heyday of Catalan independentism, which was in 2013. So they've rigged it by postponing it 6 years, the same way as they helped to collaborate rigging the Scottish one by having it before Brexit and not after it. So to keep closing, I've already said like most of the things I wanted to say. But an important thing is how they put lies into us. Not everybody in social media is a shield that works for London, but a lot of lies are put in circulation by them. The lie that unilateral declaration of independence would create a new Ulster in Scotland, that is put in circulation by British secret services. The person at the top of the lie is the same person that say that Nicola Sturgeon has a plan, and all these lies are delivered to us, normally start by a government shield or department in London that puts it in circulation, and then lots of people in good faith, because they have it from sources they believe, people hiding under the saltire or Scottish patriotic images or names, tend to be trusted, which is sad. If somebody came with a balaclava in a bar and pretended to be called Robert the Bruce and be for independence, nobody would believe him. But in social media it happens. So all these lies they put in our brains are put in our brains by people we trust. But the message is we should stop trusting no one, because there's no better strategy and the logical strategy of our enemy. Our enemies have had us dominated for 300 years, and they have secret services, money, contacts, and all the way. So they fish in organizations, universities, and social environments, and they get people to work from them as early as 16 or 18. And people work their whole life against us, pretending and being helped by the enemy to reach top positions in politics, social life, and media, to work against us. Finally, we've had Alex Salmon here collaborating in Catalan television yesterday by talking about right to decide, democracy, referendums, human rights, and all these nice sounding words that are being used not to talk about the thing this was about when we started. And it's sad to say that it seems that both the Scottish and the Catalan frog are reaching boiling point. They keep us moving through the motions after dangling carrots. This is about independence. This is about ending 300 years of imperial rule, both in Scotland and in Catalonia. So those who gave us nice words, and it's happening from top down in Catalonia, and also with the help of Alex Salmon and Nicola Sturgeon, which shows that this really is a big Hollywood production where everybody in every country is collaborating to murder Catalan independence through referendum. This is not about all those nice sounding words, because there's no democracy in infiltrating our country, in lying to 7.5 million Catalans, 5.5 million Scots, to make them follow leaders that work for the enemy, to make us go through the motions of referendums that can never deliver independence, but they can only serve to murder independence through endless, never-ending referendums that will never get us where we want to go. Only the truth will set us free. This truth is particularly not nice, realizing that all our lives we've lived like Trumans in the film, following leaders that work for our enemy. But a lot of people already know this truth, so they cannot execute us all, so the truth won't die. People who have found out the truth, we are not better or more intelligent or more patriots than people who haven't. We are together in this, and it's taken us 20-something years to find out. But we have to rejoice, because some of us have discovered the world plan to murder both Scottish and Catalan independence. So we'll unveil and unmask treason and the traitors perpetrating it. We are gonna win this. We are already winning this. Guanyarem.
This is Hadrian Radio, coming to you from Free Catalonia, a KA radio production.